The wind tugged at the edges of the old town square, carrying a hollow whistle through the empty streets. Sergeant Nolan's K-9, Riker, stood motionless, eyes locked on the towering clock above the abandoned courthouse. Hours had passed, and still the dog didn't move. Shadows stretched unnaturally over the cobblestones, twisting the familiar into something sinister. Nolan rubbed his face, uneasy. He had trained dogs, but never seen one obsessed, fixated, as though the world itself had stopped and only this tower held the answer. Something was hidden there, something waiting for them. The town of Brindlewood was a hushed relic of forgotten ambition, cradled by rolling hills and dense forest. Its streets were narrow, the brick buildings sagging under decades of neglect, paint peeling like scabs. Street lamps flickered, powered by an aging grid that groaned with every storm. The courthouse clock tower, the town's proud centerpiece once, now leaned slightly, its face cracked and tarnished. Riker, a German shepherd with a sleek black and tan coat, sat rigidly in the square, tail motionless, eyes unblinking. Nolan's boots clicked on the wet cobblestones, a rhythmic punctuation to the eerie silence. He squatted beside Riker, breathing in the chill air. "Riker," he said softly, testing the dog's attention. Nothing. The animal didn't even twitch. It wasn't unusual for police dogs to sense things humans couldn't, but this obsession was different. The dog's ears were pinned slightly forward, posture taut as if bracing for an unseen threat. Nolan frowned. The clock tower had been abandoned for years, yet Riker acted like it wasn't just a building but a living entity. He tried calling out again, louder this time. "Riker, come on. Let's move." Still nothing. The dog's gaze was fixed, unwavering. A shiver ran down Nolan's spine. Something in the way Riker held himself suggested danger, something tangible, something lurking just beyond human perception. The town square was empty except for the flutter of newspaper scraps skittering across the ground. Nolan's radio crackled faintly in the distance. "Sergeant Nolan, do you copy?" "Yeah," he replied, voice tight. "All quiet so far." Riker's growl was low, almost imperceptible, vibrating in his chest. Nolan tensed. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, as though the dog would answer. A sudden gust of wind made the clock tower's loose pendulum sway, creating a soft, hollow thud that echoed through the square. Riker flinched, not away, but in recognition. Nolan followed his line of sight, squinting up at the tower. It was absurd, but he swore he saw movement in one of the broken windows, a flicker of shadow that didn't belong to the wind. He shook his head. "Get a grip, Nolan," he muttered. The townspeople had left Brindlewood long ago, driven away by economic collapse and the whisper of a tragedy no one spoke of. Only a handful of stubborn residents remained, people who knew the town's secrets and were careful not to speak them aloud. Among those left, there was talk of strange sounds at night, children disappearing into the woods, and lights flickering in the clock tower at odd hours. Rumors Nolan had dismissed, until now. Riker's growl deepened. Nolan crouched closer, studying his partner. "You're telling me something's up there. Something real, huh?" The dog's tail twitched slightly, almost imperceptibly. That was all the confirmation Nolan needed. He approached the courthouse steps cautiously, eyes scanning the darkened windows. The door was weathered, with swollen and splintering. A lock hung loosely, rusted through. Nolan's fingers itched for his firearm, but he held back, relying on Riker's instincts. The dog nudged aside with a heavy snout, urging him forward. Inside, the air was thick with dust and rot. Every step Nolan took made the floorboards groan in protest. Broken furniture leaned at odd angles, and the walls were decorated with peeling paint and faded murals of past town events. Smiling faces frozen in time. Riker moved ahead, nose to the ground, ears alert. Nolan followed, senses straining. The stairs to the tower creaked violently under their weight. Nolan gripped the railing, every step measured and careful. Shadows shifted unnaturally in the flickering light of his flashlight. At the top, the room that housed the clock's inner mechanisms loomed vast and foreboding. Rusted gears jutted from the floor and ceiling, frozen in time like a metallic skeleton. Riker stopped suddenly, hackles raised. Nolan froze, following the dog's gaze. Across the room, A small metal hatch, almost hidden by a fallen beam, quivered as if breathing. Nolan swallowed hard. Something had moved beneath the floor. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice tight. Riker crouched low, muscles coiled. Nolan's hand rested lightly on the gun at his side, though he knew the danger wasn't conventional. This was something else entirely. He moved slowly toward the hatch, flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. Dust swirled in the beam, particles glinting like tiny stars. The hatch shifted again, then with a sudden metallic creak, a hand shot out. Nolan stumbled back, heart hammering, flashlight clattering to the floor. The figure that emerged was gaunt, eyes wide with a mixture of terror and calculation. Who's there?" it rasped. Riker barked sharply, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Nolan stepped in front of the dog, shielding him instinctively. "Easy," Nolan said, voice firm. "I'm Sergeant Nolan. Calm down." The figure, a man mid-30s, dressed in ragged clothes, stared at them, panting. You don't understand. You can't. He'll come back," he stammered, backing against the wall. Riker growled again, low and threatening. Nolan's heart sank. This man had seen something. Something real. "Who will come back?" Nolan asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The man's eyes darted to the clock's inner gears, then back to them. The boy, he's trapped in time. You can't save him. Not without paying." Nolan's mind raced. Trapped in time? Was this delirium, or something darker? He glanced at Riker. The dog's ears twitched, nostrils flaring. Riker had never reacted this way to human fear, only to real threats. The man bolted, disappearing through a side corridor. Nolan cursed under his breath and followed. The corridor twisted unpredictably, walls narrowing, ceiling low, cobwebs brushing his face. Riker moved ahead, sensing the path better than Nolan could. A sudden scream echoed through the tower, sharp, panicked, bone-chilling. Nolan froze, heart pounding. It was a child, a real child, calling for help. The corridor ended abruptly in a small chamber. Sunlight filtered through a cracked skylight, illuminating the figure of a boy huddled in the corner. His clothes were torn, eyes wide with terror. "Please," he whispered. "Please don't let him take me again." Riker lunged forward, barking, then stopped short as a shadow detached itself from the far wall. Nolan's gun came up, trembling. The shadow moved with unnatural precision, and in its hands a small, intricate clock, ticking backwards. The hairs on Nolan's neck rose. He realized the truth. This wasn't ordinary. Someone or something was manipulating time itself, and Riker had known all along. The dog's obsession with the tower was an instinct. It was recognition of a danger Nolan could barely comprehend. The boy whimpered, curling into himself. Nolan took a careful step forward. "It's okay," he said, voice firm but gentle. "We're going to get you out. I promise." The shadow advanced. Nolan fired a warning shot. The figure froze, then darted into the shadows. Riker growled, teeth bared. Nolan grabbed the boy, lifted him to safety as the tower seemed to hum around them, gears vibrating, wind whistling through cracks, time itself pulsing like a heartbeat. They didn't know what had just begun, only that Brindlewood held secrets darker than the town's crumbling streets suggested. And as Nolan carried the boy down the tower steps, Riker aside, he knew one thing. The clock tower had eyes, and had chosen him to witness something that might cost more than life itself. Outside, the wind had died down. The town square lay silent. Riker finally looked away from the tower, ears lowering, tail swishing slowly. Nolan knelt beside him, voice soft. "Good boy, Riker. You saved him." The German shepherd didn't move, eyes still glinting with a strange intelligence. Nolan felt it. There was more to this, something waiting, something unresolved. He knew the tower wasn't done with them, not by a long shot. As they walked toward the patrol car, Nolan's phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Time watches, Sergeant, and it never forgets." Nolan froze, his blood running cold. The game had only begun. Riker padded silently at his side, unwavering. Together, they would face whatever came next. But Nolan knew the truth. The quiet town of Brindlewood had already changed, and nothing would ever be the same. The following morning, Brindlewood seemed almost normal. Fog clung to the streets in thin veils, curling around the lampposts like fingers. The courthouse clock tower loomed in the distance, an ominous silhouette against the pale sky. Sergeant Nolan sat in the patrol car, the boy bundled in a blanket in the back seat, eyes still wide and haunted. Riker lay beside him, ears twitching, tail occasionally thumping the floorboard, alert to every whisper of wind. Nolan studied the boy, tried to gauge how much he had understood, or how much he had been forced to endure. His name was Eli, and though he spoke only a few words at first, the trauma was etched deep in his expression. His small hands clutched the blanket like a lifeline. "You're safe now," Nolan said softly. "No one's going to hurt you." Eli's gaze flickered toward the courthouse. He's still there," he whispered. "He watches. He waits. And if you try, it's worse." Nolan's jaw tightened. He didn't ask who he was. Not yet. Some things weren't ready to be named. He didn't need Eli's words to know the danger was real. Riker's low growl from the front seat punctuated the silence. The dog had sensed it, and Nolan trusted him more than any explanation. The small-town sheriff, a stout man named Reeves, arrived mid-morning. He looked grim, folding his arms across his chest as Nolan stepped out of the patrol car. "Morning, Sergeant," Reeves said, eyes narrowing. "I hear you've been poking around that old tower again. That boy you found, he's a mess. Doesn't even make sense. Parents say he wandered off into the woods months ago. No one expected." "Save it," Nolan interrupted. "We got a real problem, Reeves, and I think it's bigger than missing kids." Riker wouldn't react like this for nothing. The sheriff's lips pressed into a thin line. "You're talking nonsense. That dog been acting up ever since you brought him here." "Acting up?" Nolan echoed, eyes hard. "Reeves, I've been handling K9 units for years. That isn't acting up. That's obsession. That dog has been tracking something. Someone, and I think it's tied to the boy." Reeves shrugged and muttered something about bureaucracy, but Nolan could see the doubt in his eyes. Everyone in Brindlewood carried the weight of the town's past, a suspicion that some things were better left alone. Back at the station, Nolan reviewed the few clues Eli had managed to convey. The boy spoke of hidden rooms time-bending, and the shadowy figure in the clock tower. Every description was fragmented, but there was consistency in the terror he conveyed. Nolan scribbled notes, his pen trembling slightly as he tried to map the tower's layout in his mind. Riker pawed at his leg, then barked sharply. Nolan followed the dog's gaze toward the window. Outside, the clock tower loomed, silent and foreboding. A flicker of movement caught Nolan's eye, a shadow that didn't belong to the wind. Riker's growl was low and insistent. Something, or someone, was watching. By late afternoon, Nolan decided he couldn't wait. He needed answers. He returned to the tower, this time with a small team, a tech officer named Page, who specialized in surveillance, and Reeves reluctantly tagging along. Riker led the way, moving like a shadow through the town's abandoned streets. The courthouse door groaned as they pushed it open. Dust motes danced in the streaks of sunlight, swirling around the silent gears of the clock mechanism. Nolan's eyes scanned the space. Nothing had moved since the previous day, yet the feeling of being watched was suffocating. Paige crouched near the hatch where the shadow figure had appeared. "There's something beneath this floor," she murmured. "Sensors show movement. Thermal imaging can't pick it up clearly, but it's alive." Nolan nodded, tension coiling in his chest. "Then we find it." Carefully, they descended into the hidden space beneath the clock tower. The air was damp and metallic, carrying the faint scent of decay. The walls were lined with old wooden crates, some broken, others containing scraps of toys, books, and drawings. Eli's own sketches littered the ground. Strange, dark renditions of the tower, of shadows moving through time. A whisper of sound came from the far corner. Nolan raised his flashlight. There was a figure crouched in the shadows, hunched and trembling. But as the beam hit, Nolan realized it wasn't human. It was a mechanical construct, like a clockwork doll, but far too lifelike. Its eyes gleamed with an unnatural intelligence. Riker growled, stepping in front of Nolan. The doll twitched, almost alive, then froze. Nolan's breath caught in his throat. Someone had been using these mechanisms to terrify, to manipulate, maybe to control time itself. A voice cracked the tension, raspy and familiar. "You shouldn't be here." From the shadows emerged a man from yesterday, face pale, eyes haunted. "It's not safe, not for anyone." "Then help us," Nolan said, voice low. "Tell us what this is. What have you done?" The man shook his head violently. I didn't want it. He forced me." "He? Who?" "Who forced you?" Nolan demanded, heart hammering. The man's eyes darted to Riker, then back to Nolan. "The one in the clock. He's not human. He bends time, watches children, plays with them, traps them. And if you stay too long..." His words dissolved into a shuddering sob. Paige glanced at Nolan, eyebrows raised. "You're saying someone or something is manipulating time? This is insane." Nolan didn't respond. He knew better than to dismiss Riker's instincts. The dog's hackles were raised, tail stiff. Riker sniffed the air, then darted ahead, nudging the man toward the hatch. I can't," the man protested. "If he finds out I showed you." But Nolan stepped forward. "You already chose to help the boy. Now help us end this." Reluctantly, the man gestured toward a narrow tunnel beneath the hatch. It was hidden, winding like a labyrinth. "Follow me," he whispered. "But you have to move quickly. He knows you're here." They descended into the tunnel, the air growing colder, denser. Strange symbols were etched along the walls, faintly glowing patterns that twisted the eye. Every step forward felt heavier, as though the tunnel itself resisted their progress. A sudden clanging echoed behind them. Nolan spun. Riker barked, but nothing was visible. Paige's flashlight flickered. The tunnel seemed endless, the walls stretching farther than physically possible. Finally, they reached a chamber, a large, circular room with a single beam of light from above. Eli was there, bound to a mechanical chair, wires and pulleys connecting him to the gears of a miniature clock tower in the center. The boy's eyes were wide with terror. Nolan ran to him. "Eli, it's okay, we're here." Riker lunged at the miniature tower. The gears spun violently, and a mechanical arm shot out, striking the dog. Riker yelped, staggering but not retreating. Nolan grabbed Eli and pulled him free, ignoring the pain as the room seemed to twist around them. The shadow figure emerged, tall, featureless, moving with impossible speed. "You shouldn't have come," it hissed. Nolan raised his gun. Paige activated a small EMP device she carried. The miniature gears stuttered, sparks flying, and the shadow faltered, letting out a sound that was almost human. Riker barked, leaping onto the figure. Nolan swung the gun, striking it with the butt, and the shadow dissolved into smoke-like motes, vanishing into the air. Silence. The chamber was still. Eli clung to Nolan, sobbing. Riker sat beside them, panting, eyes scanning the corners as though expecting the shadow to return. The man who had led them here sank to the floor. "It's over," he said weakly. "For now. But it's never gone. The tower, it remembers." Nolan helped Eli to his feet. "We'll figure it out," he said, though he wasn't certain. Some part of him knew the battle with the clock tower, and whatever force had been manipulating it was far from over. Outside, the sun had dipped behind the hills, casting Brindlewood in a golden haze. The town seemed normal again, but Nolan could feel the weight of its secrets pressing in. Riker patted at his side, alert, ever watchful, back in the patrol car. Nolan looked at Eli, asleep against the seat. Paige sat beside him, exhaustion etched into her features. The man who had helped them was nowhere in sight, vanished into the shadows of town. Nolan exhaled. "We've survived today," he said softly. "But the tower isn't done. It's watching, learning. And if we're not careful, it'll come for us again." Riker rested his head on Nolan's lap, tail thumping softly. Nolan stroked his fur, feeling the weight of the responsibility that had been thrust upon him. The K-9 hadn't just saved the boy. They had both been drawn into a game that spanned more than human understanding, a game that blurred the lines between reality and something far darker. And in the distance, the clock tower loomed silent but alive, waiting. Night had fallen over Brindlewood. The town bathed in the cold silver of the moon. The streets were silent, except for the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. The courthouse clock tower rose like a dark sentinel, its face fractured and grim, shadows twisting around its edges. Sergeant Nolan, Riker at his side, stood at the base of the tower, surveying the town square. The events of the past 2 days had left Nolan exhausted, but sleep was impossible. His mind kept returning to Eli, the boy who had been trapped, and to the shadow figure that had eluded them. Something inside him knew the danger wasn't gone, it had only shifted. Paige approached, flashlight in hand, her expression taut with concern. "Sergeant, I've reviewed the images from inside the chamber. There's something you need to see." She handed Nolan a tablet. The footage showed the mechanical chair, the miniature clock tower, and the pulleys. But there was more. Hidden in the corner of the room, almost imperceptible, was a figure standing perfectly still, watching them. The town sheriff, Reeves. Nolan's stomach turned. "Reeves!" he whispered. The man had protested their involvement, dismissed the danger, and yet here he was, observing from the shadows. He's been playing both sides. Riker growled low, tail stiff, ears forward. The dog had sensed it long before Nolan had. A betrayal, cold and deliberate, hung in the air. Nolan and Paige moved quietly through the fog-shrouded streets toward the sheriff's office. The building was dimly lit, blinds drawn, but movement could be seen inside. Through the cracked window, they saw Reeves kneeling over papers and maps. Symbols similar to those etched in the clock tower tunnel scattered across the desk. Nolan's voice was low. "What the hell has he been doing?" Paige shook her head. "It looks like he's tracking patterns, maybe even predicting the shadows' moves. Or controlling them." Before Nolan could respond, a voice came from behind. "I'd be careful accusing me, Sergeant." Reeves stepped into the doorway, hands raised in mock surrender. "You don't understand what's at stake." Riker barked sharply, stepping between Nolan and Reeves. Nolan's hand rested on his holster. "Then explain," he said evenly, "before someone else gets hurt." Reeves sighed, gaze flickering with guilt and fear. "You think I wanted this? I've been trying to contain it, to protect the town. But the clock, it isn't just a tower. It's a conduit. It watches, it bends, it manipulates. And it's drawn to Eli. It always has." Nolan felt a chill creep along his spine. "And you thought watching from the shadows would be enough?" Reeves swallowed hard. I had no choice. If the shadow knew I interfered, it would have gone after everyone. The boy, the town, Riker even." The dog growled, hackles raised. Nolan realized with a sinking heart that this betrayal, though morally gray, was not without reason. The sheriff had been trying to play both sides, and in doing so, had risked everything. A sudden movement caught their attention. From the mist, the shadow figure emerged again, more distinct now, more terrifying. It was taller than before, its featureless face seeming to absorb the moonlight, body shifting like liquid shadow. It moved with unnatural precision, advancing toward them. Eli's voice, small and frightened, came from behind a corner. "Sergeant, the tower, it's alive." Nolan sprinted toward the boy, Riker leaping ahead. Reeves followed, face pale, eyes wide. The shadows struck, and the world seemed to ripple around them. Time itself twisted. The ground stretched and contracted, buildings warped in impossible angles, and the air hummed with a strange resonance. Nolan realized the truth in a flash. The shadow figure wasn't bound to the tower. It was the tower. It had used the mechanical constructs, the hidden tunnels, even Reeves' manipulations, to lure and trap victims. And now, with Eli present, it intended to claim him fully. "Riker!" Nolan shouted. The dog bolted, teeth bared, lunging at the shadow. The figure recoiled, momentarily slowed. Nolan grabbed Eli and dragged him behind a rusted lamppost. Paige fired the EMP device again, sparks flying, momentarily disrupting the shadow. But it wasn't enough. The shadow advanced, shapes splitting and multiplying, flowing like ink and water. Nolan realized that direct confrontation would fail. He needed a plan. Reeves, trembling, pointed to the courthouse. The heart of it, the clock itself. If you can reach the main mechanism, you can sever the connection. But it's dangerous. Nolan nodded. Danger had been their constant companion. Paige, get the boy to safety. Reeves, you stay here with him. Riker and I will go up. Riker barked once, a sound full of trust and determination. Together, they sprinted toward the tower, the shadow figure flowing around them, mocking every step. Inside, the clock tower loomed like a metallic cathedral. Gears and pendulums turned silently, as if powered by some invisible force. Nolan could hear Eli's distant cries echoing faintly, mixed with the low, mechanical heartbeat of the tower. Riker sniffed the air, then charged forward, paws pounding the wooden floor. Nolan followed, heart hammering, adrenaline sharpening every sense. The main mechanism of the clock tower, a massive, intricate assembly of gears, rods, and pendulums, dominated the center of the chamber. The shadow pulsed, almost sentient, reacting to every movement. Nolan assessed the mechanism. If he could disrupt the main gear, perhaps they could sever the tower's influence. But one wrong move, and Eli or Riker, or both, could be lost forever. He began climbing the scaffolding surrounding the gears, Riker at his heels. The shadow twisted around them, striking with impossible speed, forcing Nolan to duck and weave. Sparks flew as the shadow collided with metal, the sound deafening in the enclosed chamber. Finally, Nolan reached the central gear. It was enormous, spinning with a hum that vibrated through his bones. He grabbed the lever connected to it, straining with all his might. The shadows surged forward, black tendrils wrapping around the machinery, attempting to stop him. Riker lunged, snapping at the tendrils, growling with every ounce of strength. Nolan yanked the lever. The gear shuddered, groaning violently. Light erupted from the mechanism, filling the chamber with blinding radiance. The shadow screamed, a sound like metal tearing, like voices screaming in unison. The tower shuddered, time itself seeming to warp and twist. Nolan felt his vision blur, the air vibrating with unnatural intensity. But the mechanism held, and with a final, echoing clang, the shadow dissipated into nothingness, leaving only silence. Nolan slumped to the floor, Riker pressing against him. Sweat and blood streaked his face, hands trembling from the effort. He looked around. The chamber was empty, still ordinary. Paige appeared at the doorway, carrying Eli. "He's safe," she whispered, tears streaking her face. Nolan took the boy in his arms, holding him tightly. "It's over," he said softly. But even as he spoke, he knew the truth. The clock tower had been defeated, yes, but its memory lingered. Shadows of its influence might return someday. Reeves appeared behind them, head bowed. I failed to protect everyone," he admitted. Nolan regarded him quietly. There was guilt, yes, but also a glimmer of courage. The sheriff had made mistakes, but he hadn't abandoned them when it counted. Nolan exhaled and looked at Riker. "You've done more than anyone could ask. Boy, you saved him and all of us." The dog nudged his shoulder, eyes steady and intelligent, as though understanding every word. Outside, the town was quiet. The clock tower still loomed, silent and inert, but its shadow had lifted. Brindlewood felt different, lighter, somehow, but Nolan knew the scars remained, hidden in the walls, in the memories of the streets, in the whispers of those who had left. Eli slept in Nolan's arms as they walked toward the patrol car. Paige and Reeves followed. The fog had lifted, revealing the hills surrounding the town, gentle and ordinary. Yet Nolan's mind remained alert, scanning the distance, sensing what lay beneath the surface. For days afterward, the town slowly returned to routine. Children played in the streets. Adults moved about their chores. The air smelled of wet earth and with smoke. Yet Nolan and Riker remained vigilant. They had glimpsed something that should not exist, and they knew that vigilance would be their companion for the rest of their lives. One evening, as Nolan patrolled the empty streets with Riker, he noticed something unusual. A clock in the town square, long thought broken, ticking faintly, irregularly, like a heartbeat. He froze, pulse quickening. The K-9 stopped beside him, ears forward, tail stiff. Nolan whispered, "Not again." Riker barked softly, nudging Nolan forward. Together, they approached the clock, cautious but resolute. They were no longer just observers. They were guardians. The clock tower's shadow had receded, but Brindlewood would always be a town of secrets. And some shadows, Nolan knew, never truly fade. He glanced at Riker, eyes steady, unwavering. We'll face it, together. The K-9 nudged his hand. Loyalty, courage, understanding. The bond between man and dog had endured the darkness, and it would endure whatever came next. The night settled around Brindlewood, quiet but full of memory, full of stories yet untold. And in that quiet, Nolan felt a fragile peace, the kind born not of victory, but of survival, and of love that perseveres even in the face of the inexplicable.